allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everybody. All right, first item on the agenda, roll call.
Chair, can you hear me with this one? Okay. Commissioner Federico, Commissioner Bolin, Commissioner Duran, Commissioner Metcalf.
Present.
Commissioner Bacon,
Present.
Commissioner Leonard,
Present.
and Chair Halby.
Present.
Chair, we have a quorum.
All right. So I see we don't have minutes from last meeting.
No, sir, I'll give them to you the next meeting.
Okay, so we don't need to do approval of minutes. Move right on to whole business. All right. First item on the agenda here is Cool PZ 211027. Proposed zoning code amendment submitted by Coolidge property owners to remove solar farm from the list of conditionally permitted uses in ag zoning district.
Good evening, Chairman Halby and members of the Commission. You know this is old business. The three items on our agenda tonight have been previously discussed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they're here again tonight. The first item on the agenda, as you've mentioned, is the zoning code amendment that was initiated by some private property owners here in town that requested that the city evaluate changing our zoning code to basically remove a solar farm, which is listed in our current zoning code as a conditionally permitted use in the agricultural zoning district. For the benefit of everyone, and I'll repeat from prior meetings, solar, industrial scale solar or utility scale solar is something that is, recently, in recent past, come up, and we really never had a good zoning definition for utility scale solar. Didn't have a very good way to address it as these requests came in. So at one point, the city staff suggested that we look at solar, these utility scale solar projects, as a conditionally permitted use in the agricultural zoning district rather than rezone thousands of acres of land industrial. And so the Planning Commission and Council previously approved this zoning code amendment, and that's how we ended up with a number of properties in Coolidge representing about 16% of the total city limits planning area that are currently approved through a conditional use permit process, and some of which have even gone as far as major site plan. And so tonight, for your consideration, is this amendment to take that option out of the zoning code. And staff is recommending this evening that you remove the solar farm as listed in our current zoning code as one of the conditionally permitted uses in the agricultural zoning district. We've got another code amendment that you'll consider next on the agenda that kind of better addresses how we would handle solar scale projects in the future. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. This is a public hearing. We are talking about a zoning change, a code zoning ordinance change, which is a public hearing. So happy to answer any questions you have.
It's not so much a question as a comment. We've got this agenda item and several others, and one of the things that I've been concerned about, and I think some of the other commissioners too, is the issue of the remaining underlying industrial zoning. And so I'm wondering if it isn't appropriate to provide some polite request or instruction that be something that we take a look at relative to, and please don't throw anything at me, but if in the future there's a need to address additional solar facilities or that which we have, it almost seems like we're missing that third component, which is a specialized type of zoning or a specific zoning outside of the overlay, so we're not in fact leaving industrial in some of these areas where it absolutely shouldn't be, or we're focusing it somewhere where it should be. That's been something that's been an undercurrent through this whole process, and I remained a little unconvinced that we're not causing a problem relative to that industrial underlay once some of this stuff goes out. I know it's 20, 30, 40 years out, but it still sits there. So that's a question/comment, I guess, particularly for staff.
I want to make sure I clearly understand your comment. You're referring to the industrial areas that are currently designated as solar right now, or?
Well, for example, and it may not be a current issue. For example, on the, you know what? Well, it is for this agenda item. Let's talk about, as we're looking at the current projects, we've got the one that's, well, current, proposed, that's already been approved, all the way over there off of Tweedy, right?
Okay.
That's not going to be built to utility scale solar, but that doesn't mean that something along solar, or somebody comes back in. But it's in between, as staff has continued to point out, other uses, and when that comes off, if the underlying is somehow construed or forced as industrial, I'm wondering if outside of the overlay there isn't something else we need to be doing as we're taking a look at removing some of these things from an agricultural overlay. Is there something else we should be taking a look at to ensure we don't have somebody in the future saying, well, I didn't do my solar project, and because we took it out of ag, it has an underlying industrial situation. And I use, not because I know anything, I'm just saying that Tweedy isn't.
I think you're asking good questions, and I think what we're talking about here, under the overlay zoning, under the overlay district that we'll be presenting in the next item, every property up there has underlying zoning. It's either ag or it's industrial in most cases. If the overlay were to go away, everything that's permitted in ag or industrial is still permitted. It's just that the only areas, more the next agenda item, the only areas that we would allow industrial scale solar projects, which are those projects that are generating power put onto a grid, ultimately selling power to a utility company for sale to the ultimate electrical benefit of the users. If somebody wanted to go into an industrial area and put a solar array that's associated with their industrial use, but they're not, let's say a data center came in and they wanted to do 1,000 acres of adjacent and solar adjacent, that's not an industrial scale solar project. It's just selling power. It's for their own benefit. So those will still be allowed to continue.
Okay, it's an important distinction, and my question, I can refine it, is by this agenda item, we're not missing another subsequent step, which is then to go in and ensure that it is clearly identified somewhere else. The staff's comfortable with this change relative to everything else that's on the agenda, that we don't then need to follow up with yet another zoning code change to ensure that we're not sending mixed messages.
I feel comfortable as city manager and zoning staff feel comfortable that we address utility scale solar with the subsequent items.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This item is open to the public. I will ask that you curtail your time. We're going to curtail you to about 2-3 minutes. If you'd like to get up and speak to this agenda item, please do so. Come to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear you.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Neely. I reside at 280 North Christensen Road in Coolidge, Arizona. The first item on the agenda tonight as you all know, is the zoning amendment removing solar facilities from a conditional use permit under agricultural zoning. That is a sole and separate, entirely different issue than the second item on the agenda, as we all know. And I wanted just to share that we have met with Mr. Miller and with the citizens here in Coolidge, and we are very pleased and very happy that we have a consensus of going forward with this amendment to the zoning change.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else?
I'm Noah Hiscox. I live here in Coolidge. And I'd just like to second what Debbie said. We've had some great discussions, Mr. Miller, Mr. Lopez, and several of the citizens in Coolidge, multiple discussions, and we're very pleased with this amendment, and we encourage you to thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, George Ardondo, 560 South Attaway Road, Coolidge. I want to echo what was previously said about this current amendment here, but a quick question. 3 months ago, I was here for some other solar-related issues, and if I recall, the overall plat maps or zoning maps have not been updated for like 8 years or something like that. And so it's fine that we're making these changes here, but is there going to be another process where we can revalidate what's ag, what's light business, or what's industrial and all that?
I think obviously we like to keep current zoning maps. We had I think our maps are current. Tim Hansen was our GIS employee who kept those maps current. If you believe that there's something that's not accurate, we can always look at the record and see, but
I'm not saying it's not accurate, it's just that I think every, I don't know, is it 5 or 10 years?
It's the general plan of
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
The general plan.
the general plan. Yeah,
That one.
yeah. No, that's a good point. The general plan is actually voted on every 10 years, and we'll be doing that update a few years from now. That is different than zoning. That's a land use policy.
It's good that we're changing some things, but sometimes people slip in some of these changes that doesn't align to the master plan.
Actually, I think you really answered, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I think your question is great. It's valid. I think the next time we do an update to the general plan, we want to probably address utility scale solar in that general plan document and how we have handled these or how we plan on moving forward with the utility scale solar. I think we probably would have avoided a lot of the concerns and problems had we done that in the last general plan, but we didn't know we were going to be inundated with all these requests. So, and I don't think that we're any different than any other city or town in other parts of the country. Utility scale solar projects are kind of more of a recent phenomenon.
Totally understand everything that you're saying. Maybe it used to be a 10-year cycle, but with this emerging stuff, it may be easier for everybody that we know what their overall plan is in the future. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Wirtz. I live in Casa Grande, 12006 North Hazeldine Road in Casa Grande. And I'm not good on my colors, but I've been farming most of that purple and whatever color. Family owned it in the 50s, a lot of it. But on the solar deal, it's pretty complex. And I mainly have questions. You said it's 16% of Coolidge's
City limits.
city limit, 16%.
Yes, sir.
I thought we were a lot bigger than that.
16% of our total city limits area is currently dedicated for solar through a conditional use permit.
Next question I had, if a farm sells homes and they want to be a totally green community and they want to have 1,000 acres of solar panels to do that, would that be acceptable, or is that part of this?
I think
you have to go to M&I and then...
No. No, that would not address that situation. If you had a community, an individual residence that wants to put solar on their house and reduce their electric bills by putting solar on their house, that this does not address that. This does not restrict that. This would restrict the utility scale solar projects that generally are on anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200, 1,500, sometimes 2,000 acres. That's really, and it's just strictly solar arrays that are generating power through a power purchase agreement to be sold to a major utility company that would then sell the power to an ultimate customer.
So if some development, say they had 1,000 homes and they wanted to be green, could they build a 1,000-acre solar farm?
To put on the individual house roofs or what?
No, build a farm. You're not do each house individually, but it's more efficient to do it as a.
You're talking about the developer then would be in the solar business selling the power to the homeowners?
To the homeowners, yes.
Don't know that I've talked or that we thought that through. We've never had that kind of a request. I think that I think you're asking a question. I don't know that most developers are going to spend maybe they would spend money on buying 1,000 acres to just put into solar to reduce power costs for individual homeowners. I just don't know that. I mean, that is speculation. Potentially could happen, and if something like that happened, I think the Planning Commission and Council would probably want to address that situation somehow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
If no one else comes up, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, before you tonight, we do have related to these items on the agenda this evening, we have a letter from Rose Law Group, from Chris Webb, Director of Land Development Solutions, that you can read related to the agenda items tonight. Also have Mr. Bolin provided comment on the agenda and is included in the public record as well. Is there anybody else who knows it?
No, because this is Friday.
Okay.
The others are.
And we may, and Gilbert may have had a couple of public comments. Do you know?
For item 3.
For item 3, okay. And let me just go ahead and mention those as well with these, so if they know, because we're going to talking about all 3 tonight. Let me just.
So we did have a letter of support for item number 3 on the general plan amendment for Vail. On the infill, it's I think Stacy Brimhall and I think St. Solar and Jakob Anderson expressed support for those. The last one.
So those are the only public comments that we received that we know of.
Okay. Perfect. All right. At this time, we'll close the public hearing.
Do you want to say anything?
Take a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve Cool PZ 2010-27 as discussed and written.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Then removed. Our second item on the agenda. Proposed zoning code amendment creating an industrial solar farm overlay to define appropriate areas for solar farm development within the city.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, again, this item follows the item that we just took action on to really address how we're going to handle future utility scale solar projects. We're calling them industrial solar facility overlay zones. And as we mentioned before, we had a number of projects that were previously approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission with a conditional use permit. It's approximately 8,392 acres of property within the city limits, which again represents approximately 16% of the city limits boundary today. I think with that number, and if you look at that percentage, I think the city's been pretty accommodating for utility scale solar projects. I would think it'd be hard to find another community in Arizona that's been more accommodating to solar than we've been. So I want everyone to know that we are not against solar. We've had a lot of solar come before the commission, and we do want to everyone to believe that we believe in. We've identified good locations. It's just at this point the community is kind of beginning to ask how much is too much, and so with that, we've been looking at the this ordinance, and what we have here is a proposal for the commission's consideration that would create a new zoning category, be in section 906 of our zoning code, and we are entitling it Industrial Solar Facility Overlay Zone. And the purpose of the zone it's an industrial solar facility overlay zone is intended to provide locations for utility scale solar facilities where electrical generation from such a facility is delivered to an electrical substation via transmission lines, and solar to electric utility companies for the ultimate delivery and sale to the electrical customer. Within this zoning category, this overlay zone, there would be no uses that are principally permitted, but conditionally permitted uses would include any proposal for an industrial solar facility or a utility scale solar project. Some of the permitted accessory uses that we would allow within this zone would be fences and walls, landscaping, battery storage, overhead electric transmission lines and poles, and other accessory buildings and structures that are related to the solar facility. The maximum land area devoted to any utility scale solar project would not exceed 1,000 acres. Setbacks are established in this ordinance. Typical setback would be 75 feet from the front, 75 from the interior and corner side yards, 75 feet from the rear, and then we'd have a requirement that would increase the setback to 500-foot radius from the nearest wall of any single-family home nearest the solar facility, or any potential residential project that's under development. We obviously would want to make sure that we have adequate separation between any future residential home and the solar arrays themselves. The maximum height of the solar panels would not exceed 10 feet. We also have a decommission requirement. Once the solar facility expires, say at the end of its life, we would require a decommissioning plan that must be filed and include the necessary funding assurances to ensure that the property is returned to its pre-existing condition or better, including remediation of any environmental issue that may have been caused by the solar facility. Secondly, if the title to the industrial solar facility is vested in a special purpose entity or an SPI, SPE, that should be SPE in your staff report, entity is with an E. A written guarantee from its parent company must be included, fully binding the parent company to all the terms and conditions of the decommissioning plan. Should said industrial solar facility be leased, sold, or conveyed, that guarantee will be fully binding upon the successors and or assigns of the special purpose entity and parent company, as well as any other subsequent owner operator of the industrial solar facility. And the third thing, if not constructed within 5 years, the conditional use permit expires. And then at the end of the solar field life, the ISF overlay zone will terminate. So we wouldn't have a perpetual designation of the industrial scale facility on the property any longer after the end of the solar field life. We know that, and we've been told that these solar fields typically are 20, 25, 30, maybe even longer life. So who knows what's going to happen 25, 30 years from now. So we really just assume at the end of the life of any of these projects, the industrial solar facility overlay would terminate at that point and would be addressed that many years down the road. Any property in floodplains must comply with certain requirements. Any property located in the ISF overlay zone and any flood 1 or F1 or F2 overlay zone must comply with the regulations of the applicable overlay zone, that's a flood control concern. Boundaries of the industrial solar facility overlay zone are established in Exhibit A. And Gilbert, do you have an exhibit that we can pop up there real quick? Or not? Okay. Well, let me go to the last one here before we show the exhibit. Overlay zoning is to govern the industrial solar overlay zone created by this section shall overlay the underlying zoning district. That's kind of what I was mentioning to you before, Chairman Leonard. In the case of a conflict between the provisions of this section and the provisions governing the underlying zoning district, the provisions of this section shall govern. And the exhibit, do we have a copy of the exhibit that we can pull up? There we go. So here's the proposed boundary of our industrial solar facility overlay zone. As I mentioned before, it really mirrors the properties that we have previously approved through the Planning Commission with a conditional use permit. We made one change for your consideration. We actually included approximately 110 acres just south of Randolph Road, lying immediately to the west of Fast Track Road. Yeah, okay. I don't know if I can, my laser pointer can show that far, but let me just see real quick. Right there, this property was never in a previously approved Planning Commission conditional use permit. We're recommending that that property be included because it's entirely surrounded on three sides by previously approved solar. But in doing so, we removed this little area, which is 160 acres south of it. I'm sorry, that was 139.46 gross acres. It looks like 160 on the map, but when you take out the right-of-ways, it's 139.46 acres. Begin replacing it with 110 acres, and so we actually reducing the amount of solar from the overall area by about almost 30 acres. So that's one change that we made, including this, eliminating this. And I'll remind everybody in the audience and the people that we were working with on this, that it doesn't prevent anyone in the future from coming in potentially and requesting solar on this property because it had a previously approved conditional use permit. This doesn't change anything that was previously approved. Unlikely that any individual company would want to establish a solar array on 134 acres or whatever that was. It's just too small. But there is a potential for that to happen. Okay? That is the proposed boundary that goes along with this overlay district. I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission has at this time.
First, got to get close. First, thank you very much to everybody who was involved in this. I'll start with what might be the simplest question to make sure we're okay, because this has been, I don't want to lose this important point because folks have made it. The agenda item says industrial solar farm, but the action item says industrial solar facility. I don't think the attorney is going to scream at me if I point that out and say we're talking facility, right?
Yes, we are. Okay. Made it very clear. I don't know, I guess the agenda item, we left it that way. But it is absolutely in the ordinance, and the way it will be spelled out in the ordinance, it's an industrial solar facility, not a farm.
Okay, good deal. Just wanted to make sure, trying to make people happy. Mr. Chair, then to some more substantive questions for staff. On the first section 906, the draft overlay, it's paragraph F. Well, let's start with E. When we recommend or state that the project shall not exceed 1,000 acres, is that a singular land mass, or is that, for example, merger acquisition of existing overlay property? We would somehow be able to tell them you can't have more than 1,000 acres.
I think any of the applicants that have come in have proposed a solar array on property,
Yes.
and when they come in and propose a solar array on property, it would be a cumulative total of any properties in combination. It would be a maximum of 1,000 acres.
So
We probably should spell that out a little bit.
one
maybe.
entity would not have the ability to have more than 1,000 acres of solar.
Unless they go through a variance.
Members of the commission, Chairman Leonard, how I'm reading this is it's project-based. So if a entity comes in for a project, it's limited to 1,000. If the entity comes in for a separate project 5 miles away,
It'd be another
it's a
1,000.
separate
They
1,000.
can't hear.
Use it.
On the next budget, let's requisition some more microphones.
We're working on that, actually.
Yeah, so see, okay, so it's project-based, so if one entity comes in for a project, cannot exceed 1,000. If they then 5 miles away want to start a new project, it's another 1,000 acre limitation.
Okay. And to affirm, I'm going to ask the same question again so we're all on the same page. If the chairman wins the lottery and decides he wants to divest and become a solar facility baron and buys up all this property and comes in and says, I am the sole owner of all this property, I'm going to put it into solar, is the city going to make him or anybody else go through the process of now dividing it up into 1,000-acre chunks? That seems a little...
It could happen, I guess, if you won the lottery. I mean, that's pretty
It's
a good
related-
question.
It's a question related to, I appreciate the effort that's gone into this. So let's leave that for a second.
If I may, just before you leave that for a second, I think the intent here is to minimize the impact on the size of any one location. So I think the idea here, some of these that came in previously were on 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 acres. That wouldn't happen under the new, if it doesn't prevent it from happening on any one of these because these have already been approved. If somebody came in later and said, hey, I'd like to expand this overlay zone area, and I want to put solar in this part of the community, they still can ask the commission and council to consider amending the solar overlay zone to increase the area somewhere else. If they would do that, they would be limited to 1,000 acres somewhere else.
Mr. Chair, staff, I appreciate the backstop. I'm pointing out something as moving forward, not just with this, with the potential, for example, as we start talking about general plan updates and some of those other projects come up, that maybe I might request a point of clarification that, as our esteemed attorney has pointed out, it wouldn't necessarily suggest that an owner would total maximum 1,000 out of all. It would just need to be a part of a separate project. Okay, that might be a point of clarification that could be worthy of discussion. On section F, a theme that you might hear from me that in previous lives has caused developers and others to cringe is I like big setbacks. I think they're distinctive. I think they make for a unique setting. But my question is, when we're saying in the code from the nearest wall, do we really mean the property line?
No, wall of a single-family home wall. It's a single-family home, the face of the facade of the single-family home. Maybe that should be better. We should use a single-family home facade rather than the wall of the property.
Well, the other, and I want to make certain that there's equity on both sides of this. I'm not suggesting that folks would inherently do this, but if we're in the middle of a pretty important discussion about one of these projects, and a wily person figures out, well, if I just move my wall 5 feet in any direction, I can cause a lot of problems. And so when I have a general concern, again, related to, I like what we're doing here, but the precedent this sets moving forward, where if somebody says, well, I don't want the next residential development being any closer than 500 feet from my property or my wall, and I'll just start playing with where I want my wall. I like the idea. I like what we're doing here, but I think there's an opportunity to provide some more clarity so everybody knows what we're talking about. Because the first thing I thought of was, well, that's the property line.
I think you raise a point, and it says wall of a single-family home, but I think we need to say facade of the existing home.
Well, and we might be looking at, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I appreciate you humoring me, is we start talking single-family homes versus multifamily homes versus those types of deals. A question for the commission, or as we move this through, the council might be, I think we're also in the mood of wanting to make certain that if somebody's, in an apartment or a condominium, we're providing the same level. Now, maybe we don't think we're going to have that situation, but I appreciate starting with the single-family homes, but I think there's also an opportunity to make this apply to other folks who, and particularly those folks who are building those multifamily projects. It's just a thought. It's just a comment. Mr. Chair, I promise I can shorten some of this stuff up. If we go to now section G, this is probably a question certainly of staff and the attorney, so I'm going to make a generalized question. We have some pretty significant requirements here related to, among other things, ideas that actually could be considered maybe interference with the Arizona Corporation Commission's oversight. So it's a two-part question. Are we certain that we're not causing ourselves, the applicant, or the surrounding landowners any problems or unrealized expectations because of what we're doing here? And then everything that's in G 1, 2, 3, and 4 is going to require some type of form. I presume we have those types of documents they're going to prepare. And then third, and this is a specific question because this is part of what I do to keep my wife and kids in the lifestyle they're accustomed to, is when we start talking about financial assurances, making certain that we have an approved form of financial assurance. Anything from cash to bonds to what's going on. So my two-part question is, do we have any concerns about that? And second, can you affirm that as we will go through this process with future projects, we've got these inherent details ironed out? It's probably not a fair question on the first night, but that's where I'm headed. Mr. Chair.
Do you want to address? How are you?
Do you want me to start over?
Nope.
Okay.
Financial assurance, financial guarantee is something we require, not only what we're suggesting here, but we do that on residential developments. Before we record a final plat, we generally require the developer to provide a financial assurance in the form of a bond, an irrevocable letter of credit, cash in the bank. Who knows what it's going to cost 30 years from now to decommission something versus today. There's a lot of questions that I think the intent here is, though, we just don't want this project to be left there with all this stuff in the ground with potential contamination. So yes, I think we're going to be certain that we have the necessary legal documentation to force the compliance with our intent here, to have this properly removed, remediated, and I guess you want to address anything legally. ACC, I don't think that there's decommissioning is not a foreign practice with these things. There are many communities that require decommissioning. We just have never done it, and I think we would like to include that in our new ordinance.
And just to kind of go a little bit further on what Rick was saying, some of these, 3, 4, those are the expiration, the termination, those are things that are going to be addressed at when it would be properties rezoned into the overlay. That would be a stipulation of that zoning, or it would be a stipulation of the conditional use permit. As far as the decommissioning and the assurances, that's something that obviously we would ensure that we're in compliance with any ACC regulations, and so I think the language still gives us some room to ensure when these projects come in that we are in compliance.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And and I appreciate the response, so as to not be accused of being cagey. Really what I'm talking about is, Chevron deference and things where local municipalities aren't able to be more restrictive than is a state agency or federal guidelines. There's been a lot of effort over the last several months on all sorts of folks' behalf. And again, I like what I see here. I just want to make certain that we're not doing something that later comes back and goes, oh, sorry, we got told we can't do this. So I trust in what you're saying. I just wanted to make certain that it was out there. And then my last question is in H. I don't think I'm for limiting it to a block wall as far as decorative interference. I'm not saying it isn't appropriate, but if I have one specific request, I think it would be to include language that says if, and I do recognize I'm bringing up a sore subject when we talk about landscaping and solar projects, but I don't know that I would like in this to have it restricted to block. We could say wall or we could say something else, but that's just a specific comment I have related to that. And Mr. Chair, as always, thank you for your patience.
If I may, real quick, just on that comment on Section H, we had a lot of conversation with the participants in our evaluation of this ordinance, and there are places where a block wall is not going to be appropriate. It says where appropriate. There may be places in rural areas where you'd want to see a split rail fence with landscaping and an equestrian trail versus a block wall. And so we say where appropriate. Generally, if you're going to put a wall up, though, you want something durable, decorative, and that generally consists of block rather than a wood fence or something that's going to. So that's kind of we put the block wall in there. Decorative block wall.
Yeah, change the block to something different. Decorative.
Well, somebody's like to be a little more specific so that people would say, I'll just put a fence up or a chain link fence with artificial vines, plastic vines. That's not what we're looking for here. It's just, so block wall is pretty specific.
Some type of a privacy blind. That's a block wall, is a privacy blind. Just to make it sound different than a block wall. A block wall is just a block wall. A privacy blind could be a block wall, could be a tree, could be
Let's say a screening wall.
A screening wall. I mean, it's just.
That might be better.
We're really just up here trying to earn our pay. So
Yeah.
we can't change
Some
the
of
order
us
here.
spend a lot of time at the
He's really good.
legislature, so
It's good.
he's more versed in this stuff.
That's a good point. Thank you.
The only question I have, Rick, is setback on major thoroughfares.
Yeah. Yeah, the set.
Now we're only recommending 75 feet.
Yes, sir.
I know that on some of these other solar projects, especially, I believe the one on 287, we recommended, I believe, 150 feet.
I think the issue here, I think there were places where the site plan, these projects still go through a site plan process. We want to not overlook that. Conditional use permit addresses the use on the property with some minimum standards. You go to a site plan, we get a little more open conversation with property owners, but we felt 75 feet was appropriate from the public right-of-way. Oftentimes a public right-of-way boundary is not the edge of the asphalt or the edge of the curb. It's several, 20, 25 on an arterial. It could be 25 feet behind the back of curb to the property, to the public right-of-way line, and then you're talking 75 feet, and you're talking about solar panels that are behind screening, and so we felt that 75 feet would be appropriate. It's 50 feet more than what we require in any other agricultural zone. For something you're probably not going to see behind a wall or landscaping. You get it too far back, then you have a maintenance issue on some of this stuff, weeds, other things.
starting point too.
Nope.
All right. Again, this is a public hearing. Happy to open it up to the public. I will ask again that we keep it brief. And please don't try to reiterate if somebody's already said something, just for the sake of moving things on. Okay? Please.
Chairman Halvey, Commission members, Tom Bagnell, 7443 South Sunshine Boulevard. I just want to, I would like to say one thing, as Debbie Neely had said earlier, that, you know, this was a collected effort between several of us, Noah Hiscox, myself, Tom Scott, Mr. Lopez, Mr. Miller, and we thought we covered everything, and then Mr. Leonard took a look at it. but he brought up some good points, and I think those points need to be addressed as well. You know, if we call it, you know, from residential or residential structure or something in the one area there, I think that you know, the nearest wall of a residential structure, maybe that is something that we could include there. But the setbacks, the minimum of 75 feet, again, that is a minimum. And if it looks like we're butting up against what could be a major thoroughfare in the future, then, of course, at your discretion, you can go ahead and increase those. But I think this has been a good start. It was a good exercise. We felt very good about this when we all came together and we finally came up with this final draft. So it's for your consideration, and we hope you will approve it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Ardondo, before you approve it, I hope you consider some recommendations, changes in regards to the 1,000 acre Chairman Leonard, Commissioner Leonard was talking about. I would like to see something added that there is a half-mile or 1 mile buffer between any 1,000 acre parcel. This way we know there's some buffers that eliminate Tom, Dick, and Harry buying 1,000 to do their different projects all butted up together. So that'll eliminate any, you know, saturation going from 1,000 to 3,000 because you had 3 different entities. So I like to see some of that there. As regards to charges and fees, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know when you build a house, you got to pay certain fees and all that. Is that included in this code, or is it a separate code that these are addressed? That's all I have. Thank you.
I want to make sure I understood your question. That's the last question. Fees?
Yes. You know, development fees, I know when you build a house.
Yeah, that's all handled through a separate separate code.
Okay,
Yeah, fees. Yeah, correct.
You want to comment on the buffer zone?
I think he's got a good point. I think, you know, in some cases, I know we do this with the medical cannabis industry, and sometimes councils and do it with payday loan centers and other things. You can, if you wanted to, you could put a separation distance between solar arrays. We didn't really look at that or think about that, but good points by Member Leonard tonight. And if you wanted to put some kind of a separation requirement, quarter mile, half mile, I don't know, just whatever you know, obviously what we're talking about tonight isn't going to affect anything that was previously approved. And so what we're talking about tonight with this ordinance is anybody that would want to come in later and propose expanding this area. And so you might consider some kind of a requirement that would give a separation distance between these different utility scale solar facilities. One thing, though, that, you know, these things don't just pop up because they like a piece of property. They pop up because they need to be close to transmission, and they need to be close to to large substations. You know, most of the big reason we see a lot of these in our area is because of the Pinal Central electrical substation. That's where all of the power comes out of. You see all the 500 kV lines that come in and out of here. We're going to see some SunZia lines that come in from New Mexico that's going to be bringing in solar and wind energy power to the central substation. So most of these, any future requests like this are going to want to be in close proximity to those facilities. Otherwise, they've got some extraordinarily long, what they call gen ties to those facilities. So it's just food, more food for thought. Whatever you want to do on that.
Anybody else from the public? Please.
Hi, my name's Stacy Brimhall. I'm a landowner. One question, maybe you already addressed this, but as I was reading this, when it says number 1, returning it to its pre-existing condition, what if it's a farm, turns solar, and then 30 years from now doesn't have its water? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Mr. Leonard does, but just a question I have. Maybe you guys already talked about that, so forgive me.
Mr. Chair, I think what I generally understood would be that you'd return the property to a flat status. In essence, I don't think the requirement is there that you'd have to go put it back into crops. That might be the desire, but your point is well made. 30 years from now, who knows what's going on with all the other stuff. So it might not be inappropriate to clarify that, and you see it in escrow, right? Or in purchase agreements where, well, dairies, feedlots. Usually a part of the purchase agreement is consideration if the seller wants to take all this stuff off, then the purchase price is X. If you have to come in and clear it off, it's that. But that's my understanding of what staff is looking at. If they can confirm, I'd appreciate that.
I think he raises a good point. I don't think that I think you may be saying that it'd have to be returned to the original farm condition. I don't think that we can force somebody to come in and farm the land after this expires. He's right. There may not be water to farm, but it would basically, ag zoning allows more than farming. It allows large lot residential, equestrian uses, any other activity that's allowed in ag besides just the farming operations.
Thank you.
Greg Wirtz again. I got a question for Mr. Miller, just a quick one. Are these farms going to be, solar farms going to be going to M&I, municipal industrial zoning for water certificates?
I'm not sure that I'm following your question there.
Ag land has a certain certificate, and whenever it switches from ag to industrial use or something, it changes. You go down to an 1.5 foot allotments. And I don't know, I don't understand, I don't know if you can. Once it's industrial, I don't think you can go back to ag. I mean, that's what it's going to be. Is that correct?
Well, I think the water law administered by the Arizona Department of Water Resources is going to tell us what happens with this once it becomes solar. If they lose the right, the grandfathered irrigation water right on the property for farming, that'll be under the Arizona Department of Water Resources determination. It's very possible that a lot of this property may lose those rights. I'm not a water attorney or a water expert. I don't want to pretend to know that, but yeah.
Thank you.
We don't even get a per diem. Mr. Chair, staff, attorney, if it's appropriate to respond. So what he's referencing and is a valid concern for everybody, and certainly Mr. Hiscox and his wife and others who are farming understand this. The current agricultural property use comes with a designated right from the Department of Resources. That's the acronym's IGR or IGFR, Irrigation Grandfathered Right. In a classic sense, what would typically happen is if this was not a solar project and it was a residential project, right? You understand that. The ag right would be retired, and then depending upon who or what was going to serve the potable water, the transitory use would result in, as Mr. Wirtz is indicating, some type of municipal, or in the case, for example, if we got another electric truck facility, potentially an industrial type use. And then it's done. The utility scale solar projects have introduced a measure of gray in that when they come in and it involves property with a certain type of water use, there's a law that everybody refers to as the 5-year use it or lose it rule. So if nothing happens, that is the seller of the property, or in this case potentially the leasee of the property, doesn't do anything, then after 5 years of not using that water, a portion of that water, they would lose the right to do it, such that if and when the solar facility is decommissioned, the property itself could be returned to a flat state, but the likelihood that it could return to agricultural is somewhat diminished, because that means somebody else would have to move in who's got enough of a right to pull water into it. What I have understood typically happens is that in many cases, the way they transition these projects, they might attempt to farm, or they go into the Department of Water Resources and they can file what they call a special notice that says, here's our transitory use, here's what's going on. We intend to use some portion of the water related to landscaping. We're going to put a building on there and they need they want a drinking fountain. So what the department has defaulted to many times is, as long as they can show some water use, landscaping is an approved use, they can maintain the right. And typically what they're doing is going in and getting that in writing. So if at the end of 30 years, somebody in the room, somebody's kid decides they want to come back and they can attempt to farm it, that the water right has been maintained. You don't have to use all of it. You just have to use a portion of it. So it's an important point, and it's a very good question, and it's something that typically with the sophistication of what's going on, they'll have gone in and done that, and if they aren't, they should be. So, but I'm not a water attorney. I just play one on TV. I don't know.
And I know, there are some people investigating potential farming opportunities under solar panels in some areas that happens, and who knows, we may see some of that happen here. You never know.
Anybody else from the public?
So I'll skip past everything that's been covered. My
Name-
name's
You have your name and address?
Cassidy McCullough. I don't want to give out my address right now. If you need me to, sure. I live on Seago. So, skipping through all of this, there hasn't been enough, speaking of solar, enough research on solar. So we don't know the long run, like how it may affect us. Being a mother, that does concern me. We thought technology like phones, things like that, were safe and good, and we're learning now that they are most definitely not. In my husband wanted to ask, who is also responsible for the upkeep? Is it the city? Is it the taxpayers? Is it?
You want to ask all the questions and I can answer them all at the same time, or each one? How do you want to do that, Mr. Chairman?
Just do them one at a time.
Okay. No, the city would not be responsible, nor the taxpayer responsible for upkeeping of the solar projects. That would be the responsibility of the entity that is operating those solar projects, including the landscaping maintenance, cleaning off the solar panels if they get covered with dust, weed removal, those kind of things. That would be the responsibility of the entity operating the facility.
And as far as, like, is there any kind of idea about, like, or concern about the future of what it may do? Like, health-wise, mental, like, what we learned about technology. Is there any concern about that with the solar stuff, or?
One of the primary responsibilities of the city is to be concerned about the public health, safety, and welfare of any of our decisions. We don't take that lightly. I think there's a lot of studies that are being looked at as to the impacts of solar, impacts of using these, impacts of overhead transmission lines. Yeah. There's a number of impacts of things that are under your kitchen sink. Yes. If there are impacts that begin to create, or known impacts that create a potential hazard, I would expect that the federal agencies or health agencies would address those and begin to figure out how to mitigate those concerns. If that means get rid of solar because they're horrible and they're going to, that may be the outcome. But right now, we know that there's a lot of studies. People say these things contaminate soil. There's people that say other things. We rely on the federal agencies, the regulatory agencies, to oversee a lot of those things that we're not as good at regulating.
Okay, and I know you touched base, like, obviously, we would have to pay, right, as taxpayers. We would have to pay as taxpayers an extra fee, or is that just certain people? Is that everybody for the solar thing?
No, anyone making an application for a proposed solar overlay zone extension would pay a fee, a conditional use permit fee. That covers the cost of public hearings, notification of surrounding property owners, advertising in the paper. That would be the responsibility of the applicant. The taxpayers wouldn't pay any fees associated with any of these projects.
And, like, I did not bring my glasses, so I can't see the screen. Where it's going to be, you said it was a block wall? Where is that? I know you said Randolph, correct? Is it also, like, between, like, what's it called, Martin to, like, the end of is that where it would be, like, in that area?
On the map up here, this shows the overlay zones that we're proposing where solar can go. We referenced in the solar overlay zone a requirement, every one of these would go through a major site plan, and in some cases, a decorative screen wall, or a decorative screen would be required, potentially through the review. If a neighbor says, I really want to have a screen wall, I don't want to look at solar, the commission, through that process, could mandate a screen wall. Another property owner might say, I don't want a screen wall. It's a canvas for graffiti artists. I'd rather have landscaping. And I think the major site plan is where we begin to address those specific issues when they're doing the design and the layout of the solar on any one of these areas.
So it's just not, it's undecided as of now.
Well, like, yeah, I think with this,
I'm sorry, I can't see this map. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And happy to provide you a copy of the map if you'd like to take home with
please.
You. Yeah, we can get you one.
And that's, I think all the other questions were answered that I had, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will.
Mr. Chair, if you could close the...
Yes. All right, at this time, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve Cool PZ 211030, a proposed zoning code amendment as discussed and written.
Mr. Chair, if I can make a second, and if the first is willing to,
Yes.
on section F, paragraph 2, change that reading to nearest wall of a residential dwelling, or whatever the appropriate language is pursuant to planning staff.
Okay.
And then paragraph H, number 2, including a decorative changing block wall to screening wall. Okay. I would also request that staff clarify, if possible, general requirements for pre-existing condition. And that's my suggested details. So a second with some specifics and supporting the overall conversation.
And I second the changes made to the motion that I made.
Aye.
Aye.
Last item on the agenda, Cool PZ 220101, minor general plan amendment, submitting Randolph Solar Park LLC, changing the land use designation from urban neighborhood and business and commerce on 110 acres of land to agriculture. Parcel numbers 202-27005A, 202-330040, 0060-008B, 009A, and 202-34001A, 001B, 001C, 0020, 0090, 202-3600B, 2002A, and 29230050.
Well done.
Well done.
But they weren't recording, so you got to do it again.
Director Lopez.
Let me go ahead and handle this one just briefly. The explanation of this has kind of been talked about earlier. We had an application come in about the same time they had the Citizens Initiative application come in to change the whole zoning code. The application that we received was by a property owner that really is asking for the Planning Commission to consider the 110 acres you see up here that we talked about earlier. This property is surrounded to the north, to the west, and to the south by an existing solar project that was previously approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is a property that lies to the west of Fast Track Road. It's pretty much immediately to the east of the SRP generating station out there, to kind of give you reference. This request is for a minor general plan amendment, and that would basically allow them then to go come back before the commission at the next meeting to request the solar be incorporated into the previous conditional use permit that was granted for the property that completely surrounds this. Does that make sense to the commission members? Okay. For the benefit of everyone in the audience tonight, all of these items go to the City Council for final approval. The approval of these ordinances, even with a council approval, don't take effect until 30 days after the hearing of the City Council. The effective date of the rezoning or any zoning code amendment is about 30 days after. So we're dealing with an application that came in under an existing code. The codes that we're talking about tonight don't exist until 30 days after the council hears them. So we're acting on this request kind of under the old code. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Hopefully I didn't confuse everybody in the audience, but that's just the way, that's as clearly as I can explain it, unless you have any other legal way of explaining it better. I did notice here, though, on the request, when you mentioned all of those parcel numbers, I'm seeing that there's
These are the right ones.
yeah, let me clarify these parcel numbers for the record. The correct parcel numbers for this property, there are basically 4 parcels, and I believe those are outlined in your staff report. Your agenda referenced some different parcel numbers, but for the record, and what's in your staff report is 401-33001E, 401-33001G, 401-33001D as in dog, 401-33001F as in Frank. Those are the 4 parcel numbers that we're talking about related to this request, which is 110 acres, identified on the map.
And just so everybody knows, that is that 110 acres we were talking about on the overlay.
Yes, sir, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. And again, to everybody, we put the overlay on this property, but we took the overlay zone on the approximately 139 acres to the south of this property. So down here, the overlay came off, shifted the overlay zone up onto this property, resulting in a net decrease in the overlay zone area.
Just glad I don't own that 110 acres. I'd be on my hands and knees out here right now.
All right. This is a public hearing, so at this time, we'll open it to the public.
Chairman, Commissioners, can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
My name is David Neely, not local, technically a property owner because we own the land here surrounding the property in question. I'm the development manager of the Vail Solar Project. Most of you probably recognize I've been in this meeting for the past 4 months. I wanted to just mention that this particular application came in October, so we're looking at 5-6 months old. And I wanted to just provide a little background to the application itself because, long story short, we started working with the landowner here, Langley, or Mr. Brimhall, and the city staff members over a year ago. We've been working with the county, the city, going through the administrative process, working with the landowner, doing a lot of due diligence to complete getting the inclusion of that property into the project. The reason why I say this is...
Can you pull that microphone up a little closer to you?
Yeah.
There you go. In fact, you can pull it out of there if you'd like.
Not normally on microphone here, but the reason why I say this is I just want to make sure it's clear that we didn't do this intentionally, dropping our application in at the same time. It really was a matter of bad timing. I believe, from my understanding, our application came in like within a week of the petition request. So we understand the heartache that is brought to the staff, council, and the members. One thing I will say, though, is while these applications were delayed these past couple months, we did have an opportunity to meet with some folks within the Concerned Citizens Group, worked with the city, definitely understand their concerns, sympathize with some of them, don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything. But one thing I wanted to mention is that it wasn't intentional that we tried to slide this in and cause a problem on top of the larger, say, overlay discussion. The intent initially was working with the landowner when we started doing the due diligence to move this project forward. It largely was born out of mitigating impacts to that landowner. So a lot of the concerns we heard from the group were largely where we started with this particular landowner. When we first came in to start moving this project forward, we saw this gap kind of right in the middle of it all. And our intentions were to communicate with them, see what we could do to mitigate, just not building around them, not talking to them, etc. Largely a lot of the things we had heard. Just wanted to convey that we were moving on, or we were largely doing that prior to even realizing it was an issue within the community. So when this application was drafted, it was months in the works in coordination. And we were largely oblivious that this kind of opposition or this concern from the citizens was developing. So with that, I'll just say that if you guys have any questions or anything about the project or the request here, certainly here to take that as
No,
well.
thank you for your patience.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
And letting us work through this.
You bet.
Noah Hiscox, 1555 East Starview, Coolidge. I'd just like to say that we had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Brimhall and the other folks that are proposing this additional 110 acres, and I want it to be understood that it's an additional 110 acres of solar. But it was pointed out that because it's surrounded on three sides by solar, basically there's nothing else you can do with it. And so we agreed to compromise it. It would be an additional 110 acres of solar and add additional 110 acres to the overlay. And yes, there was a reduction of a larger acreage in the overlay, but it does have a conditional use permit that won't go away. So it could still be there. I just want to be sure everybody understands that. We thought it was only fair and a fair compromise to agree that it would be appropriate for that to be solar, because no one is going to be able to do anything else with it. But I'd like to just point out that with that said, you can just realize in the same sentence that when solar is placed next to other properties, it lowers the value of those properties. And so, we can't have it both ways. So I just want to make that subtle point. But we did agree, and we support this.
Thank you, sir.
Greg Wirtz, just a quick comment. I still farm in the area for this. The reality is, more land that comes out of production, there's going to be more water for everybody that's left. That's the reality of it. And I know there's areas here, and I don't have to go very far from here. People are living right next to dairies, and I'm sure if you can live next to a dairy, you can live next to a solar panel.
George Arnando. I don't have no dog in this fight, but I just look at this as about 1,000 acres more, and you guys talked about being concerned about 110 here, but the way the current rules were approved, there is no buffer zones. So you may have this 1,000 here, you can have another 1,000 coming in. So I hope the group emphasize that we need to kind of buffer there, because looking at this, 110 is not a big deal. Somebody else is going to come in for 320 acres down the road. Anyways, just something to look at. And my last little pitch for the general master plan, we need to get everybody looking at these things, because we're now taking away from urban areas for housing, and we're going to encroach to the business commerce side. So what are you going to have in between? Thank you very much.
Anybody else? All right, at this time, we'll close the public hearing. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve Cool PZ 220101 and include the 110 acres, but with the right parcel numbers.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Rob. Reports from the staff.
Give us some good news, Gilbert.
Commissioners, thank you. First of all, I think Carol gave me some updated numbers. Just in March, we issued 85 additional permits. 41 of them are single-family homes. So we're still continuing pretty strong on that. Any delays are really based on the developer trying to get, or the home builder trying to get parts like toilets and AC units, that type of thing. And we have windows, everything, but they get through it and they keep building. So we've got a big stack of houses that just came in. So there's quite a bit of activity still happening. And we're still meeting with a lot of prospects down south on iPads. We've got some pretty big ones, but as I tell my staff, we're under NDAs. I can't talk about it, so they kind of give me the So hopefully we'll have some other news of large companies coming into the city. We're still working on some potential things. Next meeting, we're going to have some exciting things for you to consider. And Burger King's still coming, from what we understand. It's just, I know everybody's asking about it, but they're trying to get an ADOT permit for the Southwest Gas to go into the right-of-way. So it's taking a little longer than normal, and they're still looking for bids because everything's gotten so expensive. So they assured us they're still coming to town, and I know some people, when they see me at Walmart, they ask me, where's our Burger King? So I said, we're working. Everything's ready to go. Permit's ready to be picked up, so it's just up to them. Okay? That's all I have. Mr. Miller, do you have something?
I'm going to wean myself away from the Planning Commission here eventually. I've been trying to help Gilbert, his staff, as you know, he's had a reduction in staff with some resignations, and I'm going to help him as much as possible. I sure would like to, and kind of like to acknowledge Carol. She's the wheel that makes that department move. Without her, I don't know what we would do. So I do appreciate her. Always like to acknowledge her and her efforts. You are going to have some interesting items on the next Planning Commission. We do have a submittal that was presented to us by the deadline for the May meeting, and pretty excited about it. We're looking at a new hotel, 110 rooms, a Marriott brand hotel with Fairfield Inn and Town Center, I believe. So you'll see that's up there by Safeway. So I'd just like to let you know that that's on the agenda, and just south of the Burger Kings. That's exciting to me, because I think when you start to see those type of activities come into the area, then you're looking. I think then people begin to recognize the need for restaurants, full service restaurants, and other things. So that'd be a good thing to. And I'm hopeful that it'll happen. You never know. I mean, obviously that depends on funding and a lot of other things, but we have an application which is at least promising. So.
I want to say before I do my call to the public. This whole project has been an arduous task for all of us. I really do want to thank the staff. I know you guys have worked extremely hard going back and forth. I really heartfelt to the public. Without your guys' support, who knows where this could have led. I know that our hearts are here for the community, but we need your support. We've done many, many, many of these meetings and literally had nobody sitting in those chairs. And for the last 4 months to have you guys be part of the community, be active in the community, thank you. Kudos to all of you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, at this time, I'd like to open up the mic to the public, and we'll do our call to the public. If anybody would like to speak, please come to the podium. Everybody wants to go home. All right, at this time, we'll close the call to the public and get a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you all for all your hard work. Appreciate it.